So he was told that he was going to be a god as well, which will build into all this. So let's look into Alexander. Before we get there, any more questions or thoughts? I know that was a quick run through, but it took us an hour and a half last time to get that far. So here we are. Alexander the Great. Was he really great? Well, I guess that's depending upon who's looking at what he accomplished. Because again, he is going to have a tremendous, almost unparalleled impact on what is happening up until this period of time. He was arguably the greatest general in history. He won battles, and we'll go into some of his battles and exactly why and how he won those battles, and how he was able to just dominate like no one had ever dominated before. The amount of the losses he took upon the enemy versus the amount of losses that he took inside his forces is never been achieved before by any other force. So we'll see that fits right into Scripture. He reigns from 336 to 323, only 12 years, or 13 years, however you want to look at it. He was known as being an audacious, athletic, bold, handsome, charismatic leader. He was raised up under his father to be a military tactician, but he was also trained by Aristotle on the classics. It is said that Alexander would go to sleep at night on the Iliad, and he would quote the Iliad to people in large portions of it as he was going on military campaigns. So he was a very intelligent person. He was known also for his brilliant battlefield timing, to strike at the exact correct time. He also led from the front, something that is never done these days, but he was there with the bloody tip of the spear that would go in on the main attack. It was amazing that he lived through what he did. He put his father's perfect killing machine into force. Now, again, he didn't have any land to conquer here. It was all conquered. Everything over here was tribal. He went all the way up to the Danube River. So there was nothing for him to go to. But he'll, in this local area, that he would find a place to travel to. Based upon the Iliad, he would follow the footsteps of the Trojan, war that ensued. He would replicate that with pride. So, with a force of 40,000, he defeated armies 3 and 4 times larger every time. Just not once, but every time. He also logistically maintains his forces across thousands of miles, tens of thousands of miles. It's an amazing feat to be able to do this and keep everything together as he moved his troops on the, thousands of miles away. He maintained peace somehow in the administration. Again, I think that is definitely God's involvement at this time to allow this to occur. Because there's no parallel in history like this, of one individual conquering this much land as he did, as rapidly as he did. That's why he's portrayed as a leopard with wings. And we'll get into why it had 4 heads in a bit. But according to Abernathy, famous historian, he said, perhaps the most significant legacy of Alexander was the range and extent of the proliferation of the Greek culture. Now, we discussed this Greek culture, this Hellenistic culture that's out there, that presented these thoughts, presented these freedoms to men, presented science and the way of looking at the world. Now, Hellenistic culture wasn't perfect, but it, they had some very strange things, and we'll see that tonight as we read from the Jews that encountered the Hellenistic culture and had to put up with it. Pretty interesting clash of culture. In the reign of Alexander the Great signaled the beginning of a new era in history known as the Hellenistic Age. Greek culture had a powerful influence on the areas Alexander conquered. And those areas also had an impact of that 4th beast, that 4th part of that metallic statue, Rome. And we'll see that in a bit too. All right, and here's this metallic sculpture that we're talking about. Of course, we have over here on your right-hand side, you got the Babylonian. We discussed the Academia and Empire, which was the Medo-Persians, with Cyrus the Great as the head. And now we're going to have this Greco-Macedonian, the leopard, the Hellenistic era. Now, these are some quotes from Alexander the Great, or at least attributed to him. You know, often we lose a lot in history, but these are things he supposedly said. So we can kind of understand the mindset of this man, because he has not presented much in the Bible, but his impact, we shall see, is significant to the Jewish people. He did say this, supposedly, there are so many worlds, and I have conquered even one. So he's saying there, he's got a lot to do. He hasn't even conquered anything yet. So I thought that was interesting. I would rather live a short life of glory than a long life of obscurity. Check there. That's exactly what happened, because his reign wasn't long. He died when he was 33 years old. I am not afraid of an army of lions led by sheep, but an army of sheep led by lions. So again, it's the leadership that he was going to try and take out. And that's what he did. He went for the head of the snake and tried to cut it off. And by doing so, he would defeat the army. Because, again, that's the easy part. The end and the object of conquest is not to do the same thing as the conquered. He hated setting still. After he had defeated all the land that he could defeat in the world, he sat down and cried because there was no more countries to conquer. He hated setting still. He didn't sleep well at night. He ate small amounts. He was always hungry, and it was on purpose. And he never went into gluttony. He never drank when he was younger. But when he stopped and he slowed down, that is when he began drinking, and his moods and behavior changed significantly. Okay? Any questions, let me know. And again, here's that same thing. We are seeing this, a leopard with 4 heads, 4 wings, moving fastly, not even touching the earth. And that was depicted there in Daniel 7. Here is the goat with a big horn on the head, and it's going to have 4 horns later. So that is what we're speaking of, and it fits right in with all these other scriptures we discussed. Now let's talk about Alexander's conquest. 170 years after the Persians invaded Macedonia, Macedonia invaded Persia. So here's where they invaded. And here is where Alexander the Great will move from Pella, which is the capital of Macedonia. Next reader, please read this as it discusses this terrific goat that shall come.
As I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between his eyes came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. He came toward the 2-horned ram I had seen standing beside the canal and charged at him in great rage. I saw him attack the ram furiously, striking the ram and shattering his 2 horns. The ram was powerless to stand against him. The goat knocked him to the ground and trampled on him, and none could rescue him from his power.
Okay, so here we shall see, this goat with a prominent horn. The prominent horn is Alexander the Great. The goat is, of course, or the ram is what we discussed earlier, was that, Medo-Persian Empire. Notice here it says, came from the west. Oh, that's exactly where this is coming from. And crossed the whole earth without touching the ground. That is a means in Hebrew to say that you're moving so fast they can't see your legs moving, right? So this is swift. I cannot overemphasize that the travel at this time was by horse, okay? And it would take, over this stretch, it would take 2 months to get information across here if you were trying to get across fast. He started out here and conquered everything in this entire area in that period of time, that, basically a decade, against opposition that was dedicated to destroy him. So he was flying. As we saw earlier, when Darius was going to go over and destroy Greece, it took him about a decade to go over there. And Xerxes, it took him another decade to get his force over here. He wiped all this out in that amount of time, a decade essentially. So here's Alexander. This is the Bible prediction. Now we'll dig a little bit more into this. How did Alexander the Great accomplish this? He started here, and we're going to cover a few of these battles here so I can show you what kind of a killing machine this was. We'll also see, this third kingdom says this of Daniel, another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear ruler over all the earth. And that's what he did. This was the known earth at the time that he conquered. And of course it doesn't show where he came from here in this area. But these are his major battles. We'll go over these three. We're not going to go over this one because he used the exact same techniques every time. And guess what? He wins every time using the exact same technique. Here's his battle. Now, notice the numbers here killed. 35,000, 50,000, 70,000. In his whole battle, these were slaughters. He would lose hundreds of men. And he would wipe out tens of thousands in every battle. Now again, these were not all dressed in cloth. The king was no dummy that was fighting him. His name was Darius III. Darius III hired Greek mercenaries to fight him and kill him on his terms, or at least tried to. They were just a different breed, the Greeks were. But they were wiped out too. So he wasn't going up against a minor force. These were men that had been levied and they were going to kill. They were fighting for the king's life too. So how did he do this? He used the same tactic every time. Now right here you'll see Alexander over here on the right charging with the cavalry to a point. Here you'll see the same thing. Charging with the cavalry to a point. Here the same thing right here. Charging to the cavalry to the point of attack. Every time he was there and he was in front of his troops, rallying them forward. So just imagine the guts that took. The guts that took to go up there and attack. Now, has anyone tried this before? Yeah, they tried this before. But his timing was impeccable. He would wait till the exact right time and unleash his most vicious group of killers that he led, his companion guard, and they would go in and they would hit this line. The whole thought about this, hitting this line at this point, was to cause a breach in their line. A breach in their line here. And when they had that breach, his goal was to turn the force, go in this area, get behind them, and then attack them from the rear. At the same time, his forces would come up here with that line of the phalanx, jabbing and pushing. So he would kind of wheel around and push that other force against the phalanx that would just cut them to pieces and slaughter them every time.
He just cut out the chance for retreat. He gave them nowhere to go.
Yeah, and he was waging war like they had never seen anyone wage before. He was there to annihilate them completely. And that's one of the things that honed to the skill of this weapons. It was a high-tech killing machine. They didn't have anything like it. They didn't fight that tactic in the Persian Empire. And here, Alexander the Great brought this full force and wiped out complete armies. I mean, you're wiping out this many people. You're killing 300 people a minute for 8 hours in a row to get those kind of numbers. The slaughter was just tremendous. Now, this is Bible study.
I was going to say,
This is Bible study. But I want you to understand what this meant. And the Bible predicted this as well, that he would slaughter and trample them down and there was nowhere to hide. He fought all these battles, and he was in pursuit of this king over and over again until he was finally killed during this battle. Now I want you to get a feel for this killing machine that he unleashed upon the world, because this is exactly fulfillment of Scripture on what he was capable of doing. Can the next reader read this?
I can try.
Okay, can you see it or not?
Yeah.
We'll read down to about Shirley here.
Well, I'm gonna let Jenna read it. She got better eyes than I do.
Okay.
Just read
I think you're right.
it. Surely.
This is from Carnage and Culture by Victor David Hansen, page 76.
The Greek central idea of fighting in mass through shock battle remains predominant at Macedon. Integrated with and protected by such variegated forces, Philip's phalanx of the true pikemen was more lethal and more versatile than the traditional hoplite columns. Nothing, the historian Powerless concluded nearly 2 centuries later, can stand up to the phalanx. The Roman by himself with his sword can neither slash down nor break through the 10 spears that all at once press against him.
Next reader, please. Right here.
Can you read it? I can
If not, I can read it. That's fine. We'll wait till someone else. Surely, what's that? Surely, Polybius was correct. The idea that men could stand firm when 3, 4, 5, or more iron spearheads plunged into their limbs, heads, necks, torsos, and legs is improbable. Since the first 5 ranks of the Macedonian phalanx would present a staggering wall of points, with the first row's pikes extending 10 feet into the killing zone, an enemy would have to fight his way through a storm of spears which protruded at every angle before he could even reach the initial phalanx line. They had no defense against this once they broke into those ranks. So the whole idea of Alexander, he's the same thing at every battle. His timing was perfect. When the enemy was tired, he pushed through, wheeled about, and drove them into that phalanx, and they were wiped out over and over and over again. And that technological advantage, that fighting ethos that was in these people was something that they had been raised on and they had worked on. These people that came from the provinces in Persia were probably dirt farmers for the most time, brought into levies to fight for the king. They really didn't stand a chance. So it was slaughter. There were 200,000 people killed in these decisive battles alone, and his battlefield goal was to annihilate the enemy completely. He did not want any of them leaving the battlefield. So he, when you see this little red line, it's true that it was red because his army was wiping out anybody that opposed him. This was that first battle you saw at Grenicus. Here's another one at Isis that he's fought. Here's another one at Beal. But he came down through here. And you either submitted to him or he would destroy you. He would destroy you and he would kill every man that he went up against. And the women and boys and girls he would turn into slaves and sell. That got the attention of the other people, and they opened their gates and welcomed him as he came through. He did not have any war down here against the Egyptians. They told him he was a god and a pharaoh, and that's what they called him as, and he didn't deny their worship. But I do want to read something for you from Josephus. Josephus is a very interesting character. He actually fought in the 66 AD revolt of the Jews against the Romans. He was captured. He was the only one to live, and he wrote a history of the Jews. And he is going to tell us of a time that Alexander the Great came to the temple in Jerusalem and what transpired there. So, if you will just indulge me here, and I know these glasses are very attractive, okay. For Alexander, when he saw the multitude at a distance of the people coming from the temple in their white garments, while the priest stood clothed with fine linen, and the high priest in purple and scarlet clothes, with his mitre in his head, having the golden plate on which the name of God was engraved, he approached by himself and adorned that name, and first saluted the high priest. Now, this is Alexander the Great that's doing this. So this is pretty amazing. The Jews also did altogether with one voice salute Alexander and encompass him about. Whereon the king of Syria and the rest were surprised at what Alexander had done and supposed him disoriented in mind. However, Parmenio, who was his major general that was working under him, second in command, alone went up to him and asked him how it came to pass that when all the others adorned him, he should adorn the high priest of the Jews, to whom he replied, I did not adorn him, but the God who hath honored him with that high priesthood. For I saw this very person in a dream, in this very habit, when I was at Dios in Macedonia, and when I was considering with him myself how I might obtain domination in Asia. So what ended up happening is the priest opened the book of Daniel to these very verses that we read here. And the priest said, my God predicted you would dominate and crush Persia. You are the goat with the prominent horn. So Alexander, one of the things he was he was very superstitious. Sometimes the night before battle, he would stand up or give offerings to the god and stay up praying and stuff. But a fascinating piece from Josephus. Is it true? I don't know, but he didn't destroy Jerusalem. And he, in fact, honored it because of this piece of scripture. Now, I think that's pretty fascinating, that Alexander the Great had a piece of scripture from the Bible that we read tonight, read to him. And because of that, he thought that he was blessed by the God of Israel, and he honored him, and he honored those people, and he didn't tax them for the next decade. So that's pretty amazing stuff. So here was this man, Alexander the Great, and he went through, and this was the final battle, but he didn't stop there. He went on to Susa. He rested in Susa, but then he went to Persepolis, the capital, and he burned it to the ground, because Athens was burnt to the ground when he went through. They robbed all this. Now, it's interesting enough, Alexander wasn't there just for the glory. He was something to the tune of, I think it was $50 million in debt in his country. When he came through all this, he took everything and shipped it back to Athens, and he made all his men very rich. The riches of Babylon, the riches of Persepolis here, and then he continued on and fought all this area here, and he only stopped because his troops said it's time to go home. So that's what ended up happening. So this was a bloody, bloody takeover of this land by the Greeks. It wasn't a nice conquest, but this was allowed to occur by God in order to fulfill the prophecy that would allow the world situation to be just right for the return of Jesus Christ. He left a trail of destruction and death, killing and enslaving hundreds of thousands as he conquered his empire. Alexander was welcomed by God, I said that, in many of the conquering nations. The Babylonians called him a god. And they did something equivalent to going down before him, prostrating themselves before him. Now the Greeks, who were free and independent-minded folks, didn't like that at all. They didn't like when Alexander the Great said, you Greek guys ought to do that too. Everyone else is bound to me like I'm a god. They didn't take that very well, and there was a lot of discord in the army. Once he conquered this land, he had to figure out how to rule it. And he found out that he really liked some of these gentlemanly Persian lords and ladies. And he decided to govern these people. These are people that are better administrators than the Greeks that I have. So oftentimes the conquerors take on and bring into their governments the people that they conquered and put them to use. And Alexander the Great was doing the exact same thing. I mean, we did the same thing. In World War II, when we defeated the Nazi Germany, guess who we hired to run the trains and run the government afterwards? Nazis. They were all Nazis in one way or the other. So you got to use what you're given. So he was trying to meld this Greek culture that he brought with him with this Persian Eastern culture that he had. In fact, he married multiple wives of Darius III, daughters. And so he had a daughter, a number of wives that were from that family, so he would legitimize himself. And he also had 200 of his officers marry Persian ladies, so he was trying to meld the two together. Under his generalship, Alexander used the Macedonian army as a technology advanced killing machine to annihilate the Persian Empire or anyone else who stood in his way without mercy or quarter. He carried out the campaign of total war and was only stopped when his troops had tired of the far-flung carnage. Now, I question, did Alexander the Great conquer this to spread Hellenistic culture, or was that simply a byproduct of his quest for glory? I personally think that he had it within him. He himself wanted to trace the steps in Asia Minor over here of Achilles, and that's why he came across the Hellen spot, which is this little bit of ground here, and he went to Troy first. And when you go to Troy, back in those days, what you would do is take off all your clothes and run around naked around the walls of Troy. So he did that. When Joanna and I visited there, Joanna didn't want to do that. I don't know what to do.
So did you?
She wouldn't let me.
Oh.
She had killjoy. No fun. So, this whole time he was on a quest for glory, and he attained God-like worship and God-like acknowledgement from these people. And his mom had told him from his youth that you are the children of gods, and it went to his head. And eventually he ended up back here, like I said, at the age of 33, crying that he had conquered the world and there's no more to conquer. There's many stories of his death. The one that is the most common was he had a drinking contest with somebody. He drank so much, and because of that, he ended up getting the cold and died 10 days later. At the age of 33, he died. So what happened after he died? 323 BC, after Alexander's death. All this kingdoms, a number of areas went to the revolts. The Greeks revolted. A number of different areas revolted. It was a period of turmoil, killing amongst these generals, because on his deathbed, they had asked him who he's going to leave his empire to, and he said, to the strongest. So they were there to fight it out. Yeah. So there you go. So upon his death, the empire plunged into an immediate conflict, and it lasted for years. Finally, in 303 BC, some of the major generals got together and carved it up. I have 4 or 5 periods of time shown here, but what's interesting about this is, depending upon when you put your finger on history, there's 4 kingdoms, 5 kingdoms, 50 kingdoms. So what does the Bible say of this period of time? Somebody read Daniel 8:8, please. Next reader, please.
Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up for notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven.
All right. Now, I don't know if the high priest read this part, Alexander the Great, because that's that great horn, the goat that waxed very great. And boy, did he wax great. I mean, he conquered the entire world. And, as we saw, that goes with Daniel 2. this leopard with 4 wings, and that now we have 4 heads on this thing. For the great horn was broken and came up 4 noticeable ones, or notable ones. So how many kingdoms were there afterwards? Again, like I said, where you stop, you'll have 4 kingdoms, 5 or 50. This one shows 5. You'll go back and you'll see different ones. They're trying to figure out what the 4 notable ones were. But to the 4 winds of heaven. So that's exactly, the whole earth was covered. And 4 winds of heaven always blow from Jerusalem. So you look at Jerusalem, north, south, east, and west, it was all under the control. Jerusalem was right in the heart of all this, if you notice. Little old Jerusalem, again, is in the center of these great empires that occur. As a result of all this, there's tens of thousands of Greeks migrated into this region and became the ruling class. Now, these generals came and set up the governments. They did not set up democracies. They were military dictators that set up kingdoms in which hereditary rule would occur. And that's what we see here with these kingdoms. Every one of these generals carved out a piece of land with what he could conquer with his sword, and then he became the ruler. Some were more successful in terms of the length of times that they survived than others. But all of them were Hellenistic cultures, and the economies were all connected in trade routes. They all spoke Greek. It became the common language, and that common language of Greece would remain in that area until the time of Muhammad would come in. In fact, what's your Bible written in? The New Testament. Greek. The New Testament is in Greek. So Greek culture spread throughout this entire region.
Yeah, I don't have that Bible, Joe.
Huh?
Yeah, I don't have that Bible.
Understand, but the original language that Jesus Christ and his disciples wrote in was Conic Greek. So you can go back.
Translated to what we have.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And, it's translated, into English, and the Erasmus one is the one that was used to, for the most part, build the King James Bible. But the reason all this was, things were able to spread so much is the language changed to Greek, and it became the lingua franca. In other words, the language that everyone speaks internationally. So because of this, this cultural spread due to Alexander the Great over this entire region, this sowed the seeds for the culture that would be in this region during the time of Christ. I think that's pretty fascinating. That's where it came from. Alexander the Great and the Hellenistic empires that spread. Now, while we're talking about this, talking about history, we were up here around 303 BC. Now I'm going to show you, here's the Seleucid Empire. One of the generals was named Seleucus, and he formed the Seleucid Empire. And that's the one right here. And there's, of course, Baghdad around here in Susa. The Medo-Persian Empire was formed here. But it's just shown on this page because this is going to have an impact in Jerusalem. But I wanted to show you, this is Alexander the Great's empire here. And look how by 200 it had cut up into all these little pieces. The 2 major pieces that were still left were the Seleucid Empire, the Ptolemaic Empire, and you had one in Macedonia up here. But you notice over here there's a little thing forming over in Italy as the Roman Republic is growing and growing and growing. And it will eventually cover this entire region, that beast of iron. But at 200 BC, Jerusalem was under the influence of these Hellenistic cultures. Now it says the Ptolemaic Empire. It's ruled by Greeks too. So when you see Cleopatra the 7th, you all have heard Cleopatra, and Julius Caesar and Anthony, and she got bit by an asp, that sort of thing. That was a Greek culture that had a veneer of Egyptian lore on it, but they were just Greeks. So I think that's fascinating because they always depict Cleopatra as this exotic Middle Eastern looking woman. No, she was a Greek. And there was a Greek that they interbred. So this is of course, the fourth beast that is coming, but it's waiting over here in the wings for exactly the right time that God will allow them to move into this region. And we'll see where that occurs tonight too. So it's pretty interesting. What?
So it's got to be God involved in that, because the Seleucid Empire and the other ones there, those were Alexander's generals. They knew how to put together the phalanx and use it. They did it for years, but yet they didn't put it back together to fight for their own land.
Yeah,
When
well,
the Romans came in.
yeah, well, and the thing about this time, you know, while Alexander was able to conquer because he had this new warfighting technique, well, when the generals all broke this up, well, they had that same warfighting technique. So it wasn't effective. It wasn't a surprise. So they could not conquer each other like, you know, they did, you know, with Alexander coming in and just destroying everybody because they didn't know how to fight it. These guys knew how to fight it. These guys were the generals, and they taught their children how to fight like that too, to defend themselves. But again, here's empire number 3, or the remains of it down here. This is Alexander's former empire. This is one of the 4 goats that are talked about here, those 4 horns. So these are carrying on that Alexander's tradition, waiting for this 4th beast over here to rise and destroy them all, which will occur when Rome moves forth. And we know that, and the reason I'm showing this is because all these kingdoms have times that they were set up, and they have times that they're going to end, just like the United States. Now, we tend to think of the United States as a monolithic, always been here. The United States has only been around about 250 years.
We were not a superpower
Yeah.
starting out.
Yeah, so you look at in the time span, the United States has not really been around that long. Now we have a short lifespan, we're here but a wisp. You know, we cannot perceive time as these nations form and fall. But I want you to see that these guys got it coming too. And they're, you know, the Roman Empire is also one of those nations that form that the people had skin in the game. The Romans had a senate. They had the people that voted and raised up, and they were part of this government. And that is a very, very powerful thing. Now, you could go up against a king and kill them, but you cannot go up against the Roman Senate. You might kill one of their armies, but they'll be back because you're fighting the entire nation. You are not fighting a general. So that's the one thing about the Romans. They kept coming, and they would destroy, and they would trample down everybody, just like the Bible says here. So somebody read this next in Daniel 2:4, talking about this coming 4th beast.
And the 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron. Forasmuch as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. So
here's what's coming. So what's between? And that's what we're looking at again. What is between? We saw Alexander. We saw the breakup of these 4 horns that are coming. And that's the last we saw was the 4 horns that shall come. And you can split it up however you want. But there's 2 powerful kingdoms that would arise out of this. And these are mentioned in the Bible a lot because they are centered around Jerusalem. Notice exactly between these 2 kingdoms where Jerusalem is. It's right in the middle. God put Jerusalem right in the trouble from the beginning of all these super powerful nations so that she would struggle and seek him even though he is not very far away. I think that's pretty amazing. The ongoing war between these 2 great dynasties which formed from Alexander's general, stuck between these 2 horns are the children of Israel. And this will help form them into who they are. It shapes these people. And, you know, it's as if they hadn't been through enough. You know, with the Babylonian Empire and the Babylonian captivity and returning to their land. And they did when Alexander came through and they survived that, these nations would fight back and forth between themselves, and Jerusalem is there in the middle as a punching bag. Again, an interesting thing for us to consider. Now, though not in this chapter, you shall see the most accurate piece of scripture in history told, where it talks about the Ptolemies and the Seleucid generals going back and forth. These battles are actually documented to the point where many historians say, that can't be right. That's not really prophecy. Someone just wrote a history. But we know that this particular book of the Bible, Daniel, was in the Septuagint, Greek translation that was made because the Greeks became Hellenized, right? The Jews became Hellenized, so a lot of the Jews could only speak Greek. So they demanded their Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, and the Torah, be translated. So all the law and the prophets, they wanted to translate it. So guess what? The king went out and said, all right, give me a translation. So he sent 70 Old Testaments in Hebrew to 70 translators in Greek. And guess what? When they translated them, every one of them was exactly identical. Well, that's the way the story goes. Is that true? I question that they could have exactly the same translation from Hebrew to Greek to the letter from these 70 people. But that's where it gets its name, Septuagint. It just means 70 in Greek. So anyway, these people were all Greek speakers, and they had wars between them. And the history that they wrote, if you got a history book, this talks right to it. And when we get to there, we'll just read it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But know all these kings are clearly identified by modern scholars as being the real deal between these two great empires that fought it out with little old Israel caught in between. Again, both Hellenistic, with an Eastern veneer placed on top of it so they can appease the local populace. Again, the Egyptians didn't become Greeks. They were still Egyptians. They were ruled over by these Greek Hellenistic cultures during this period of time. Any questions so far? Interesting stuff to anyone? Okay. All right, now we're going to read something, the little horn. Now look how much is written about this little horn. You know, we got up to 8 so far, and the first 2 verses were introduction. Then we talked about the ram and the horn for the next 7 verses. And now we're going to spend, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 verses on this little horn. So what is this little horn? So let's go ahead and start reading this. Whoever's the next reader, read 3 verses, and the next person can pick up the last 3.
And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great, toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down.
Okay, so what's the pleasant land?
That glorious land is what my version says, and that's Israel.
Correct. So he's coming in this little horn. It says, out of one of them. Now, if you looked at the previous verse, it said 4 prominent ones. So 4 horns. So some people say this is the Antichrist. And it might be a foreshadowing of the Antichrist. Not an argument with that. But this says, out of one of them. So out of these 4 horns shall come this one little horn. Everybody following that? Okay, and then it says, great to the south and towards the east. Well, let's look back here. Going south and going east. See that? So he comes through this, the land of Jerusalem. So it's, if you were looking at this, not knowing anything else, you'd say, well, it's the kingdom up here, and it looks like it's going to go through Israel over here.
Wait a minute, Joe, back up one map.
Sure.
That
Okay?
So the way I took that is the little horn is the Roman Empire going south and east down that direction.
Yeah,
And coming to take over, as it moved through the Seleucid Empire over to the Potomac.
yeah, but the Roman Empire is not one of those 4 smaller horns.
Okay.
It becomes one of the beasts later on. So those 4 horns, we're talking about coming from these 4 horns. But here, it says here, and from it came 4 notable ones, or 4 notable horns, towards the 4 winds. So around here, around Jerusalem, is where that's going to come from.
Okay.
So here we have this kingdom to the north of Jerusalem, and it's, it looks like it's going to be something from here coming down here, and that's exactly what's going to happen. All right, so
South and east or south?
I was gonna say, that's west.
yeah, south and east.
That's-
Well, you'll find out that when it comes here, let me correct myself. We'll find out that this king is going to come to the south, and then he's going to come back to the east and through the pleasant land. So you'll see that when we go through it. So he goes to the south, and then the Roman army is going to tell him, quit conquering this area and go back north, and then he's going to go into the pleasant land. And and you'll see, we'll read it right out of the history, that's exactly what happens. So my bad, that's exactly what's happening, south, towards the east, and then towards the pleasant land. So he's going to make the circuitous route. He's going to go down here south, get kicked out by the Romans, are told to leave, and he's going to go back east, and then he's going to go through the pleasant land. And we'll read that in a minute. My bad. Yes?
So, when we were, okay, I'm sorry, this is a little late. When Alexander the Great's empire was, the beast has 4 heads, it's a leopard with 4 heads. Why did it have 4 heads? Is that this?
Because he's going to break up into these 4 heads. Now, like I said, the 4 horns would fight for dominance. This has 5, and depending upon where you put your thumb, you're going to get 4 or 5 on conquerors. This one has 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 that are showing. And depending upon where you want to start and stop in this period of time, you're going to have a multitude of countries. By this time, 200 BC, it had broken up into these various nations here. So it had further broken out. But it's basically saying to the north, south, and east and west, you will have kingdoms, and that's what's showing there. Okay. Anything else?
So who is the little horn? Who does that represent?
We're going to see.
Okay,
Yeah, that's what this whole thing.
okay.
This little horn, like I said, he takes up a lot of press. Okay, let's see. And he waxed great, and even to the host of heaven, and was cast down some of the hosts. So he's the host of heaven here. We're going to find out those are going to be Israelis that they believed in heaven. He's going to cast them down. Some of the stars, which were the seed of Israel. If we remember the dream that was had by Joseph when he saw the stars in the sky and the moon and the sun worshiped him. Those stars were the 12 tribes. So, they've been called stars before. He's going to cast some of these stars to the ground, which is the Israelites, and he's going to stamp on them. And he magnified himself even as the prince of the host. And by the daily sacrifice, where is the daily sacrifice done? In the temple of God in Jerusalem. And was taken away, and the place of the sanctuary was cast out. So, we're going to see that occur. And I'm going to read from you exactly where it happens. And now before we go on, any questions? Thanks for clarifying me on the north, and the east and the west. Okay, 12 through 14, please.
And the host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. And it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be charged?
Okay, and I believe all of this has to do with the little horn. This does not necessarily have, it might have foreshadowing of the end times, but this was actually fulfilled in history. The Jews believe this. This is exactly what the Jews believe, and I think because when it says out of one of them, it's talking about those 4 horns that we previously talked about. So this one little horn is going to come from the big, one of the horns. Now, here he is. This is the person that has been identified in history as the little horn, living from 1215 BC to 164 BC, Antiochus 4 Epiphanes. And his title itself means God living among us. So he is saying, I, Antiochus, the 4th of my line, I'm a God living among you. Think he's got a pride problem? Think he's got an ego problem? Oh yeah, he does big time. This is a coin that he had made, and on the flip side of it, it says just this, God amongst you. So, what a dude, huh? But here's his line that came down where he descended from, and Antiochus, of course, is the ruler of the Seleucid Empire. Seleucus was the first one, and his father was Antiochus, so that's where he got his name as he walked down through the family. Interesting thing along here, you see all the different names. You will see that he married his sister, who also married his brother, and they had children of both. Isn't that kind of freaky? But, hey, if you're a god, you want to marry a goddess, and there's just not a lot of them running around. So, that's who he married. So
Pretty cheesy.
yeah. So interesting, we'll also see Cleopatra showing up for the first time. One of his sisters married Ptolemy IV, and that's the first Cleopatra in the line. So she really was a Seleucid at first, and they brought it on. If you carry this on down, you'd eventually get to Cleopatra VII, who's the one that married or had a child by Caesar. And that's where the term Caesarean birth comes from. That's pretty interesting. Because supposedly she wanted to have her child by Caesarean birth so it wouldn't ruin her and her beauty. Interesting. Okay, so what we have right here is we have them destroying the temple. And they're Hellenizing the Hebrew people. Now, can anyone read that? Now, this is what occurred out of history, and I want you to see this and understand what is going on in history, and put yourself as a Christian saying, okay, I believe as a Christian, I like my beliefs, that sort of thing. So what if that all was taken away from you? And I will read this to you. Shocked by these developments, this is talking about Antiochus and him trying to Hellenize the Jews. And feeling their religion challenged in their very existence, the majority of the Jewish people went over to the side and the view of the Chisdim. Now the Chisdim were the far right-wing conservative Jews at the time. They were totally law-abiding, very strict in their lifestyles. When Antiochus IV, that's Epiphanes, was expelled from Egypt by Publius in 168. Now, who is that? That's a Roman telling him, you're not going to go and conquer there anymore, because he had gone down. He had gone down and he had conquered the Ptolemies and was going to destroy them further. The Romans, the Ptolemies appealed to the Romans. The Romans said, stop. So he stopped and he went back and reversed his course. And we'll read what happened next, which is horrendous. Was expelled from Egypt by the Roman. The news reached Jerusalem in the form of a report that Antiochus IV had been killed. The rejoicing Jews deposed his appointees, massacred the leaders of the Hellenizing party, and we'll see what that is. Again, this is the Hellenistic culture, and cleansed the temple of what they felt to be pagan abominations. So the Hellenization had already occurred at this time. This is going to take one step further, and I'll show you. I'm kind of jumping in the middle of the stream here to show you the severity of this. Antiochus, not dead but humiliated, moneyless, and convinced that the Jews had obstructed his campaign against Egypt and were conspiring to return Judea to the Ptolemies, marched up to Jerusalem, slaughtered Jews of either sex by the thousands, desecrated and looted the temple, appropriated for the royal coffers its gold altar, its vessels, and its treasures, restored Menelaus, who was a fake priest that he put in charge, to supreme power, or that he put him back in, and gave orders for the compulsory Hellenization of all Jews in 167. He commanded that the temple be rededicated as a shrine to Zeus, that a Greek altar be built over the old one, and that the usual sacrifices be replaced with a sacrifice of swine, pigs. He forbade the keeping of the Sabbath. Important to the Jews, huh? That's their cultural tradition. Just as God told them to what? Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was all being changed for these guys. Or the Jewish festivals, and made circumcision a capital crime. Wow, and that is the sign of being a Jew, isn't it? You were a child of Abraham. You were circumcised, in that, I think it's 8 days that they do it. The 8th day. Throughout Judea, the old religion and its rites were interdicted, and the Greek ritual was made compulsory on pain of death. Every Jew who refused to eat pork, here's another one, or who was found possessing a book of the law. How would you like it if someone told you, we're going to burn all your Bibles and take them away from you? Because that's what was going on here. Was to be jailed or killed, and the book, wherever found, was to be burned. Jerusalem itself was put to flames, and its walls were destroyed, and its Jewish population was sold into slavery. Foreign peoples were brought in to resettle the site. A new fortress was built upon Mount Zion, and the garrison of troops was left in it to rule the city in the name of the king. At times, it seems Antiochus thought of establishing and require worship of himself as a god.
Man, there's so much going on there.
Now, before this was the gentle Hellenization. When Antiochus came back from when Rome said leave, he came back and he just raided the temple, took all their money, and forced them to be Hellenized. Now, again, the time that we're talking about here is 167. This is almost 200 years before Christ was, giving his classes. If you notice, they were wanting to overcome Roman rule. They were fighting Hellenism and the culture. And that's where all this fomented. And here, I'll do this real quick. The little horn, foreshadowing of the Antichrist. This kind of gives you a summation of what we read. After a military campaign, a false rumor was spread that Antiochus was dead. There was a public rejoicing in Jerusalem. Angered, Antiochus entered the temple and carries off millions of dollars worth of religious objects. And he took them and melted them down and became rich again. Because he was God, What do those Jewish guys need all that stuff for? He made Judaism illegal. He renamed the temple for Zeus Olympus, burns copies of the Torah and sacrifices pig on the altar in Jerusalem. And this is the abomination of desolation that we see carried out for the first time and discussed in Daniel 11:31. Isn't this pretty fascinating stuff when you consider this in the time span of history?
Joe, I got a question.
Yes.
What is the reasoning behind, when the Jewish people lose faith or turn away from God, God punishes them. And then when they come back to God and they pray for forgiveness and repent, He rewards them. What did they do to cause this to be able to happen to them and be destroyed again like this?
Living in the moment. Everyone has a very short lifespan that they live. And we see just the horizon of time that's in front of them. And often people get very myopic about what they see, and they don't see the big game. We could sit and look at history and what's unveiled for us, and we can see these things over and over and over again. You read the book of Judges, you read, look at the kings that were in Judea, up in Israel. And there were good kings, bad kings, good kings, bad kings. There was always, there's a fluctuation of faith. And then they said, and they have a revival. And it's over and over again. It's human nature. When you're fat and happy and things are going good, you forget about God and don't move to Him very much. But that's what's fascinating about this verse. If you will look at this verse, when God is shaping mankind, what does He say is going to happen? Let's get back here. I'm almost there. There it is right here. Look at this. It says, He sets up the times and space and the exact places they should live. Why does He do this? This conflict, this constant churning, this constant men against men, the free will of men overriding and causing these just horrendous conditions on the earth. Why does God allow all this? God did this so that men would seek Him and perhaps reach out for Him and find it. When times are good, do they have a tendency to reach out for God? Though He is not very far from each of us. So this whole crucible and everything else have people reaching for God, seeking a higher answer on what's going on. And that has been, since humanity's birth, is that God is trying to reach out and wake up humanity so that they will seek God and draw near to Him. I think that's just fascinating. That's what Paul provided to us as an answer to that question. Okay, any other thoughts? Well, next time, we've talked about the little horn, and we'll go ahead and go into something that you hear about it at least every year. Hanukkah, where did that come from? And Jesus, He honored that festival day. So it's a holy day for the Jews. It comes from this time of fighting back against Antiochus for Epiphanes. And again, the reason I'm covering all this is God is in control. God is shaping history for His purposes. It is not just a bunch of random things that occur. God will allow evil men on earth, but He will shape things for His greater purposes despite the evil that's out there. And we can rest assured, no matter what we're going through, that God is in control in our lives as well. We just have to look past the surface into the heart of things, and we'll know God is there, and He is executing His plan for the greatest redemption of souls that mankind can offer.